Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is January 8th, and we're up to episode 152 of Transmission.
And you've made a little poem.
The Coup, Snafu, in review.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! or boohoo,
yeah,
depending. Yeah, on your
I like rhymes, alliterations, and puns. That's who I am.
I know. And you've kind of kept it under wraps for most of Transmission, but now it's like starting to break through. It's like a volcano that cannot be stopped.
I mean, the word coup invites so much of that. It's such an interesting word. And there's such interesting times in which we live that demand puns, alliteration,
or heavy medication, or both.
Yeah. I'm Mark Van Stunek. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And I think for those who've not seen that meme, I think you need to explain that little drawing at the beginning.
Yeah. So this picture of the person like on the bicycle falling over. It's a meme where it starts with someone like complaining about something, and then they shove a stick into their own spokes, fall over, and are injured. And so the idea is like someone causing their own troubles and blaming it on somebody else. That's where the meme comes into play. So in this one, the most recent one I've seen about this coup is someone riding down the street on their bicycle and shoving a Confederate flag into their own front spokes, and then falling over and then crying Antifa. So that's how it works. So basically, I just took the image from the end and just had someone falling over with their MAGA hat like flipped off their head, which is to me what the coup it's like. It's like these people are blaming all sorts of things for the coup attempt in general or its failure, without recognizing that they only have themselves to blame.
Right. And I really do want to read this quote. I don't know if all of you are familiar with Ruby Sales. If you're not, I'd highly recommend her. You can follow her on Facebook and other things. She is a Black woman elder of the civil rights movement. Do you know how old she is? She's got to be way up there.
I don't know if she was young.
90s.
No, she was a young woman. She was a teenager in the civil rights era.
Okay.
Kind of like one of these badass teenagers. So I think she's still in her 70s.
70s.
Late 70s maybe, but I don't know. Like, and I feel bad even just talking about someone's age. Like if they're old. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
She's definitely been around the movement for a long time.
Yeah. Very wise. And so she wrote a great little piece this morning, basically related to the GOP rats fleeing the sinking ship. And she said this is from the middle of it. She said, the white empire theology of easy grace promotes dismemory, artificial memory, and detachment from the reality of individual and collective harmful and heinous acts against God, the environment, and humans. And that kind of says it all right there. But we're really seeing this so much in terms of all these GOP officials, and then regular folks on the internet who are suddenly fleeing the sinking ship and are just like going, either, there's the two things. Either it's like, oh my gosh, this is too much. This is terrible. I didn't know this was going on. This was so bad. So there's either that angle on it. Or there's the other angle on it, which is it's somebody else's fault. And usually Antifa is the culprit. Antifa, the mystical Antifa that flows everywhere. It's sort of like the ether in medieval times.
Here's something from Marcia. Ruby Sales was born on July 8th, 1948, so she's 72 years old.
So
she's young, you whippersnappers. So I'm glad I guessed in the 70s. So like, okay, that wasn't okay. That was a safe bet. But she was young.
Yeah, she was very young. Yeah,
when things were happening. But this blame, it's disturbingly fascinating to watch. Like people like that. Again, people that maybe 8 years ago you'd have thought of as kind of normal seeming, adamantly defending this idea that Antifa, like falling into these conspiratorial ways of thinking. And what where is this going to lead? Like we were talking beforehand, there's a certain comedy to this, in the sense that there's a ridiculous quality to a weird neo-pagan Viking white supremacist guy leading the charge into this Capitol and then failing. But at the same time, like it's not really a joking matter. It's just these are caricatures. The joke is that these people don't seem like fully realized people who are comical in their own assumptions. Like they're just there's a bizarreness to it, but it hasn't gone away. Like all the stuff that led us to this point hasn't gone away. It's just we just have a little bit of the laughter relief, some of us, for how absurd it was, or a relief that okay, good, Donald Trump has had his privileges taken away. He's grounded. He can't use Twitter or Facebook. Pence has taken charge, which is somehow maybe better to people because he doesn't seem as disconnected from reality, but he's still like a fascist. So it's just this is a weird transition point to something that's coming next, and we don't really still don't know where things are going.
Yeah, we've got a few comments
already coming in.
Great, coming in.
My mother and her friends feel sorry for Trump. They feel like he worked too hard and has suffered a nervous breakdown. Okay.
Yeah. So this is, I love the way Ruby has these two kinds of memory distortion, right? So, because I think that's really very sophisticated. So there's dismemory, right? She uses this term dismemory, right? So that's just basically forgetting stuff. But then there's the artificial memory, right? So that's this dissociative creation and recreation of the past. And of course, these are things that, we do all the time. I mean, they're very normal human activities. Memory is a really interesting phenomenon. We still don't really understand a whole lot of things about how it works. For a long time, there was an idea that, there's got to be a memory center in the brain, like where all the memories are kind of stored. That does not seem to be true. Memory seems to be everywhere in the brain. So then there's this idea that, well, memory is sort of like a hologram. You're just kind of creating these images of the past in your head. Memory is obviously very story-like. So, people have done all these studies about, people tell stories about memories and, things either haven't happened at all, they've completely made it up. Memory is very suggestible, et cetera, et cetera. So memory is it's a fascinating subject. And it very much, though, however it works, serves the function of orienting us towards reality. Right. And so, all these people who are fleeing the administration and people like your mom, Kathleen, they just have suddenly forgotten like that this didn't come out of nowhere. Right. I mean, that Trump has been egging these people on literally nonstop since the election, since even before the election. Right. I mean, during the entire campaign, how many times did we hear him say, the only way I will lose this election is if it's rigged, And so that got repeated over and over and over again. And then he's been egging these people on very specifically since the election. And then they forget all that and they go, oh, well, he just worked too hard and had a nervous breakdown.
It's bizarre, like as though somehow his behavior has changed.
Right.
It just doesn't even make any sense to me. It's like he's
no. Well, no, it doesn't make any sense. It only makes sense if you have altered your memory in some way, shape, or form to fit some particular reality distortion than in the present.
Medina says, easy grace. That's an entire episode.
And in fact, we're going to do that episode on Monday.
Yeah.
So something to look forward to.
When you throw out a term like easy grace, it immediately conjures up the idea of cheap grace that Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about, which is another example of memory. Again, these folks like Eric Metaxas, sixth Lord of Zappanor, he retrofitted Dietrich Bonhoeffer into becoming an alt-right figurehead.
To becoming a fascist.
Speaking of which, just jumping to Paulo's comment, they said fascist Antifa. I've heard this term before. It's like calling something like solid air. At a certain point, if it's solid air, it's solid. It's
fascist Antifa. That's great.
It's like, if you're a fascist Antifa, do you cease to exist?
Yeah, really. You've gone into some kind of wormhole. I think fascist Antifa is really Schrodinger's Antifa.
It's really, yeah.
Right.
Piper writes, any thoughts on the cross that was carried in and set up at the Capitol and the gallows also put up in the crowd? Oh my God.
Yeah. So I was actually at this virtual neighborhood meeting last night related to what's going on up at the corner here. And one of the facilitators showed that picture at the beginning of the meeting and talked about how that picture is not really being played up in the massive media. I don't want to say mainstream, but just the massive at large media, which I think is very telling, right? Because I think that that image and that reality of the cross and the lynching tree is the reality of what this movement is all about, right? And we talked about that a great deal this week, off and on, that this is really about white supremacy, an attempt to maintain white supremacy, and what more powerful, toxic, traumatizing image than that image of the gallows. And so it's and again, I'm not a conspiracy theory person. I don't think that this is as much a conscious set of decisions as the way that a system acts. But right, there are people that make decisions about what pictures get featured where. And I did see this picture a couple of times, but it certainly was not the screaming banner headline picture. Which in many ways, it certainly could have been, and maybe should have been.
I don't think people want to touch Christian supremacy because it'll upset. I mean, we still have a society where religious leadership has power. And so if you start talking about that and start saying, oh, this just reminds me of Constantine and by the sign conquer and sort of Christian identitarianism, the Catholic bishops are going to get pissed off. Like, this is because Catholic bishops in the United States in particular are very Christian identitarian when it comes to like linking Western civilization and Christian supremacy. And so this is it's a big problem. Like, and it's ironic to any of us who have liberationist instincts, who see the sign of the cross as a reminder of those who are oppressed, or those of us who maybe in a more conventional manner would see the cross as a recognition that we have to live humbly and let our egos die so that we might live in service to others. Like this, it can be jarring to see a cross used this way, but it's the dominant way the cross has been used for 1800 years, which is disturbing as hell.
Yeah. And it's so instinctive, right? That, for those of you that remember the protest at Standing Rock, there was something that happened there very early on in the protest, where a bunch of white clergy showed up, and got themselves to the front of the line for this march that was happening. And this one guy brought one of these, Anglican type, Catholic type cruciform things. He had this giant pole that looked like it was about 15 feet high with a cross on top. And he was leading the parade with this.
Yeah.
And, and this photograph, went viral, and people went nuts, and but the truth of it was that this white clergy person and the other white clergy person who were there, they didn't think they were doing anything problematic. I mean, they saw this as this positive thing, right? That they, as clergy people, were supporting this protest, and I think that was very sincere. But this Christian supremacy and this use of the cross as, onward Christian soldiers is so embedded, that people don't get the symbolism of that and how that's problematic.
It's a whole other topic that, I'm sure we would have covered if we weren't in a pandemic, because marches don't happen as much. But just how might clergy show up in a protest? Is an important thing, because it's like, there's a reason I'm uncomfortable showing up as a clergy person to these spaces, because it co-ops and it says, look at us. But then even people say, we want to witness that we're in solidarity. I'm like, well, showing up is how you do that. Like, let's interrogate why we have to show up with the religious accoutrement on. What's theologically being communicated there.
Right. And in a special way, a special people.
Yeah, and having our own special marches that are set apart from the other regular marches of the hoi polloi. So anyways, comments. Jim, because I could totally go down that rabbit hole for a long time. Jim writes, like most of us, I'm a bit shocked, but not surprised by the assault on our capital. But I am stunned by some of the clergy I know who have not stood up and shared leadership. Yes, several are aligned with politicized evangelicals. However, where are they now?
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty interesting how a lot of right-wing leadership has gotten very, very quiet over the last couple
I would have loved for them to be quiet this whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly they've gotten really quiet. And, same with the Blue Lives Matter crew, right? I mean, so, there was a policeman that was murdered in this event. By the same people who claim to be, big law and order people. And suddenly, it's crickets from all these folks. Because, this is very apocalyptic. It has pulled the wool back from a lot of people's eyes as to where these folks are really located. And so now they've got to go into hiding for a little bit.
It kind of reminds me of when Philando Castile was murdered for having a legal firearm, and how the NRA said shit.
Yeah,
it's almost as if the NRA doesn't exist to defend gun rights, but just to help white people protect themselves from the things they're afraid of.
Who would have thunk it?
Who would have thunk that? Susan writes, can someone explain how this level of criminal behavior can be done by elected officials and immediate legal repercussions are not exacted towards them?
It's very easy to explain. What you see is that the concept of legality only goes as far as the willingness of somebody to enforce that. And so, the Trump Justice Department is not going to march down to the White House and arrest Trump. I mean, they could, right? The FBI could go to the White House and arrest him. They could round up his kids who were at that rally telling everybody, somebody posted on my feed, like, where is Rudy Giuliani? He's suddenly vanished and gotten super quiet. Like, is he hiding in a bunker somewhere or on an island? And so, right, what we see is that the rule of law only goes as far as the willingness of the systems of government to enforce it. And well, we've gone way beyond that limit, right? I mean, Trump has pretty much broken the law just about every day, or at least every week of his presidency. And yeah, I mean, if you're not willing to bust people, you do whatever you want.
No, and and Biden and his cohort are continuing to push this line of that he's a president for all the people and want to bring everyone together and have unity. So they're not going to do anything about this either. And I've seen all sorts of progressive fans saying, "Oh, we've got to come together and heal," which that's not healing at the expense of justice. Is just like putting a pillow over the face of the oppressed. That's to me like what it is. It's just a softened blow. So I don't expect much to happen at all. So yet again, we have accountability.
Yeah. Now, I mean, certainly, whereas it's not immediate, and I don't think it's going to work. People are definitely pretty fired up, more so than they've been during Trump's presidency around this. I think it's quite likely, it seems at least, I mean, we'll find out in a couple of hours actually, but it seems pretty likely that the House of Representatives are going to impeach Trump again. Whether or not, the Senate will even take that up is hard to say. Certainly, a lot of people are talking about being in favor of that, which I think, they just want to go on record saying that, whether or not it happens. But yeah, I mean, the majority of folks are just going, well, he's just there for 13 more days. Let's just get through it and kind of hope for the best. And, if he leaves on the 19th, it's just, 2 weeks or whatever. And yeah.
We'll see.
All right.
Corey writes, I missed it. You guys are supposed to light the Antifa signal when we're all going to false flag. Jeez. I'm sorry. I'll add you to my Signal account so that I can send you the secret messages.
Yeah. We did light the Antifa flag. Didn't you see it?
Juice trans. The sad thing is it's not a joke. This is right. Like, there's absurdity to this, but it's not a joke. And maybe even a propaganda technique to make it appear like a joke. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, downplaying this in certain ways is a way of not taking responsibility for stuff.
Well, and that's what's been happening all along since the election, right? I mean, that has been a very conscious choice that everybody has been making, both the GOP folks and the Biden folks, is like, oh yeah, Trump's just tweeting, no big deal, ha, he's just like a 5-year-old, let's just get through this, it'll be okay. Until it wasn't okay. And that's the problem with making things seem like a joke or dismissing things or not taking things seriously, is that they don't go away, and they just continue, and karma keeps flowing even if it goes underground.
Marsha writes, I have seen screenshots of messages on Parler that are now taken down, threatening that January 19th and 20th will be worse. Have you heard that?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of stuff. One of the ironies of all this, I was just thinking about last night, right, is that everybody's like, oh great, martial law hasn't been declared, Trump wasn't successful, the coup wasn't successful. And what we've ended up with is military occupation of Washington, D.C. So it's a fascinating paradox to me about that. By inauguration day, there will be, I just heard last night, and this isn't counting state police, local police, DC, Capitol Police, there are going to be 6,200 troops in Washington, D.C. So, I'm not really worried about, Buffalo Man coming back. I don't really think that's going to happen. but what we have to recognize is that this move towards fascism has required now the fact that we call out the army to prevent our president and his cadre of lunatics from taking over Washington. So yeah, it's it's not good.
Catherine writes, I see Schrodinger's snowflake float around today. Somehow we're both liberal triggered weaklings with too much squishy compassion for human and planet pain, and also don't care enough today about white gun-waving Trump supporter feelings and grievances, many of which are sufferings we too experience, for example, austerity and lockdowns.
Right. So does Schrodinger's snowflake float or not float?
I wonder if Schrodinger, what he'd feel like knowing how his philosophical mental experiment would be so useful for political discourse.
I think he'd love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A lot of those guys really love talking about quantum mechanics to people and sort of blowing people's minds. So,
Kathleen writes, "What was up with the guy wearing the horns?"
Good question.
I mean, this is the thing. He's called QAnon shaman. Nordic neo-pagan white supremacist, New Ager.
Oh my God!
Which again shows like,
look at how many labels you have to use to describe that guy. I mean, that's one of the things that's so funny about that. That's a lot of labels you just had to use. How about just nut job?
Well,
can we stick with that?
I like to have broad
nuance.
Yes, but I mean, this is, to me, we had a whole thing about the New Age, which is a messy term. But like this idea that somehow this sort of mentality, this New Age sensibility, is like the left, and that the right wing are Christian traditionalists. Like, we got to really stop that way of thinking, because when white people grab a hold of anything and use it as a tool of whiteness, it becomes violent. Like, it doesn't matter. I have no doubt in my mind that there are Zen Buddhist white practitioners who are white supremacists. Let's just stop.
No, totally.
Assuming these sorts of something is going to be a panacea that corrects whiteness.
Yeah, no, I mean, New Age conclaves all around the country are some of the whitest, most elitist, supremacist places that there are. And, and if you try to deal with that, and I think we mentioned, Dr. Don Matthews, who we had on the show, a black man who's taught at many universities, was fired from Naropa, the kind of the Vatican of New Age American Buddhism, for pointing out how racist they were. So yeah, I mean, it's New Age and liberal don't necessarily mean the same thing, or go together, or mean anything.
Kathleen writes, "It occurred to me that the storming of the Capitol was some sort of modern crusade. I think it's like reclaiming the Holy Land for Christians."
Right. Yep.
With the sign of the cross, it's reclaiming governance for good old white people, I guess. I don't know how they'd for Western values. Whatever they want to put on it, we all know it's just another way of saying white supremacy. Jeremy writes, "Can you interpret the presence of the gallows a bit more? For whom was it intended to send a message?"
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what more to say. It was intended to send a message to anybody who's not white and who's not supporting the Dumpian cult view that we're going to kill you. And we talked about Reconstruction the other day. And again, if you go back and read what was happening, and Mark mentioned how for a while there were many black politicians, black elected figures, all of this. And, if you go and read what happened in a lot of places, including some non-Southern states, Reverend Gregory was just telling me about this the other day in Delaware, that, it got to the point where they were murdering so many black politicians that that black elected officials just kind of left in droves because they just just couldn't take it anymore. So that's the message. Oh wow, we're already 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
A bunch of comments here. So
This is Blaze through series writes, how do we deal with those who are romanticizing the Civil War scenario?
yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
I mean, people
a
have been romanticizing that
yeah, that's a
for a long
long-term
time.
problem.
I remember all
Yeah,
kinds of people
I mean,
in Minnesota trailer parks that I'd like had friends we'd hang out and they had Confederate flags hanging up in their bedroom. I think this has been a fantasy for a long time. Like we need to undo it. And people would always couch it in terms they didn't want to ever say, like, oh, slavery shouldn't have ended. But there's all sorts of crap wrapped up in that. So like this is still, the Civil War never really ended. People still wanting to fight that, and they're going to romanticize it whenever they think, to the proportion that it seems like it's a possibility. And so I don't know how to deal with that except for whittle away at their power base and make them not have much power and have conversations. I don't know. You were saying something, Dan, when I started talking.
No. Go ahead. Well, let's keep rolling.
Mark writes, we cannot expect the system to police the system. No, this is
an answers to Susan's question. Yeah.
And we have a lot of work ahead of us as as the people who care about this stuff, and it's not an easy task, but we have to find a way to support each other and keep fighting.
Yeah, keep going.
Mark writes, are we all excited about how the most recent episode of U.S. reality show has magically moved the narrative away from economic relief for the populace?
Yeah.
Good point. Like, we're not talking about that right now.
Yep. Well, and Siri's next comment kind of speaks to that too.
The fact that there is no storming to the Pentagon, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, or Amazon HQ, or Walmart HQ tells you a whole lot. Many want economic, social, democratic policies only for themselves without having other marginalized folks being also beneficiaries of those policies. I mean, this gets to like when white racist types want to point out how the Nazis were socialist. They're right in the sense that the Nazis had this idea of the German white people having some benefits, but their socialism was not what we think of as socialism. So I think a lot of these folks don't hate the idea of socialism. They just don't want it going to anyone besides themselves because they somehow think they've earned it. Right. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in these complaints. Cassio writes, he's a hyperdimensional being. I
think that's the horned guy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I hope not. Kevin writes, I've been saying for years that the peddlers of the far-right agenda have taken control of the narrative, for sure, religious and political, but now there's a crack and exposure to what's behind the curtain. So how do you see this playing out with free speech and propagation of misinformation? I don't...
Well, I think that I think that we are now going to be having a very intense and ongoing reflection around the issue of what does free speech actually mean, because I think I said this yesterday. I mean, no right is absolute. So you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right? This is the classic legal example. And so this notion that, and the Parler guy just said it this morning, like, well, I'm not here to police speech. Well, that's actually not true. Like if you create a platform for speech and people say illegal things on there, that you are not covered. That's not infinite. And so, so I think we really need to get much more educated about what free speech means. And look, one of the only positive thing I can say about Trump and this whole episode that we've had is that it has gotten a lot more people realizing that, hey, like, we actually have to pay attention to our government and we need to get involved. And it boosted the number of people voting by 50 million people, which is a lot of people. from the 2016 election. And so, yeah, this is one of the things we need to get educated about is what does this thing called free speech mean that we toss around all the time, not knowing what it means and not knowing what its place is in the Constitution or what the Constitution is even describing when it means free speech. And, you know, I think we need to be a lot more clear that we need to hold these platforms accountable. And if they are hosting hate speech and illegal speech and all of that, they need to be regulated and shut down. And I think that's part of a real agenda for justice that's coming.
Mm-hmm. Susan writes, "Wow, that's terrible for Don." Corey writes, "They can appropriate anything for white supremacy and not find irony in it because to them they are owed and should own everything." I mean, that's kind of part of the pathology of whiteness for sure. Stephen writes, "Am I the only one who senses a whole 80s, 70s vibe with white evangelicals right now?" I'm assuming you're talking about the destruction of the temple and how it creates a diaspora and different sects of Christianity and Judaism. So like, if where you're going with that is evangelicalism going to fracture and create different, like, who knows? I don't know. I don't think so, because I don't think this has broken the power of white Christo-fascism, but we'll see. I mean, I'd love it if that were the case. Ellen writes, "The gallows was there to show how our situation is similar to the French Revolution, right? Marie Antoinette is totally going to save the proletariat, y'all."
Yeah, must be.
Darcy writes, "The romanticizing of the Civil War is part of the foundational theology of evangelism. Please read White Too Long if you want to comment on this connection." I haven't heard of White Too Long. I'll check that out. CL or CI writes, "Like socialist farm subsidies, my right to carry a gun in church as long as I don't smoke a joint." And Ellen says, "If you ever worked retail, you know free speech is BS because you will be held accountable by social agreements." That's right. We have constraints all the time. It's just people get upset when they want to be able to say horrible things about other people, and they are told not to. Like, that's really what a lot of this gets down to.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've made it through Coup week. Cool. We're still here, and great having you with us. Thanks for all the comments as always. We love our commenters and everybody else that's watching and listening. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we will see you on Monday. We will be talking about grace.
Mm-hmm. See you next time.
Go all religious on you guys.
Amen.
Bye.
Bye. Oops.